Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Peace.
He's here. Alfred University Political Science Professor Emeritus, Dr. Robert Heineman.
Good morning to you all. Yes, indeed.
I want to go over the impeachment process. You know, I think, obviously, it goes without saying, this doesn't happen enough for many people to be experts on it. You talk constitutional law, political science, among other things. Now, I have to start out with, I called Reed's office Thursday afternoon to clarify a point from the press conference. Reed said there was going to be a vote next week, Wednesday or Thursday, the 18th or 19th, and the vote would be in the House on whether to send it to the Senate or not.
Yeah.
So that answers some of the question, but give us a little bit more background on the whole impeachment process.
I've been urged by some of my loyal listeners to kind of lay this out for folks. And right now, of course, the House has decided that there are two issues on which the president can be impeached. One, abuse of power, which apparently is this phone call he made, which is continually misquoted by the Democrats when they mention it, and the other, obstruction of Congress, which, again, I think has serious problems in terms of the fact that the president is, under the Constitution, I think has, the right to refuse to cooperate with Congress. But be that as it may, those two issues, neither of which contain a crime. And the Constitution says for treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. I think other high crimes or misdemeanors means that there has to be a crime involved. So that be it as it may, the House, the Democrats have ignored that, and they're going with these two rather amorphous points. Now, the Judiciary Committee then will vote probably, today, I would guess, on whether to send the impeachment articles to the president, to the House of Representatives, to the full House. Then the full House, I assume there'll be further debate in the full House on the impeachment charges, and they will then vote to send this on to the Senate. Now, they may not do that. I mean, it's possible we have a moderate group of Democrats here who don't want to vote on this at all, and so it's possible they'll try to amend it to make it a vote of censure. But right now, there appear to be only 10 or 15 of these people, and I don't know if they have enough to pull that off.
Don't you think that Schiff and Nadler would have a sense of whether it would be able to go pass in the House?
Well, it's hard to tell. A number of people, of course, feel it's going to pass in the House, but things can change pretty rapidly in this whole event here. The question will be, again, what happens with these moderate Democrats who I think are probably shaking their heads at this whole thing at this point, and especially if they're coming from districts where they've just been elected and Trump carried the district. They don't want to vote against or for impeaching the guy. They're going to have to go back and get reelected, and some of them are obviously not going to get reelected. So the point I noticed yesterday was that the Democrats are not going to put the whips on this vote. In other words, on some of these votes, they have what's called a whip system. That's assistants to the Speaker and the Majority Leader who go out and count the votes in each delegation. New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, the Northeast, the Southwest. And they got an idea how many votes they actually have. But apparently they're not going to apply the whip system in this vote, which means they're basically saying it's up to each member of the House to vote however he or she feels is justified. So that could loosen it up even more. And right now, it looks like when it gets on the floor of the House, the Democrats are going to lose some votes. The figure I saw was that Pelosi could lose 17 Democrats and still manage to squeak it through.
Some of the talk show hosts have been saying, and their callers and guests, Pelosi and Schiff in the House have been getting bullied around behind the scenes by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They say that AOC kind of behind the scenes bullies actually Schiff and Pelosi, and that neither of those two would go as far as they have without AOC behind them.
I have no idea. I mean, it's possible, but I can't believe that they'd pay much attention to her, frankly. But
Reed has said as much on this show.
Well, that may be. He has a much
on Pelosi, not Schiff, but Pelosi. He said that about.
Yeah, well, he's obviously much closer to it than we are, isn't he, Brian?
Yes, he is.
Well, in any case, so it comes up on the floor of the House and comes to a vote, and I'm saying if Pelosi loses 7 or 8 Democrats, it's going to be a fairly close vote on the floor of the House, and I think. That's going to be a bit of an embarrassment. So at any rate, it passes the House. It is then sent to the Senate, and the Senate then has to vote whether to convict the president. And if the president is convicted, that means it takes 2/3 vote of the Senate. That means that he is removed from office, and he's removed right then. And I believe, if my reading of the Constitution is, he cannot hold another office under the United States government. So my one fear at this, to get off the subject a little bit, was that even if he's removed, Trump could come back and run for re-election. I don't think he can do that. But be that as it may, at this point, again, in terms of the 2/3 vote, the Constitution says 2/3 of those present. So it doesn't say 2/3 of the membership of the Senate. It's just 2/3 of those who happen to be present. So they're talking about 67 votes. 2/3 could, if a number of people don't show up, people are sick, whatever, could be less than that. But that's a minor point at this point. Now, what happens then is the prosecution, the lawyers for the House present their case. The lawyers for Trump present their case, and then the question is, do you continue? And the presiding officer here, of course, is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Mr. Roberts, and that's spelled out in the Constitution. So after those opening arguments, the question is then, do they go into a situation where they question witnesses, people appear, just like a trial, and the senators act as a jury? And apparently Mr. McConnell has decided they're not going to go that route. That instead of one route they could go is simply just to dismiss the material from the House. Just by majority vote say, to hell with you, we're going on to other things.
What's Mitch want to do?
Would you let me run through this here for a minute or two?
Go ahead.
So they could just simply dismiss them and go on to other business. That just takes a majority vote. But what McConnell wants to do is acquit the president on these charges. In other words, he's going to have a motion of acquittal, saying that the president is innocent of any wrongdoing, period. And that just takes a majority vote. And so I think that would be pretty useful to the president, frankly.
Would the Biden stuff get in there?
Well, it's hard to tell what the defense attorneys for Trump will say when they make their opening statements. But later, if it goes to questions and cross-examination and all that sort of thing, well, yeah, the Bidens could easily get in there. I don't think McConnell wants to go that route, though, I'm telling you, because, for example, in the Clinton impeachment process, I think on at least 2 charges, a majority of the Senate voted to impeach, to convict Clinton. So it was only 51 or 52 votes, something like that. Wasn't anywhere near 2/3. But still, he's got that on his record. What McConnell wants to do, instead of voting whether to convict or not, is simply vote simply to acquit, simply to say right off the bat, the guy is innocent of any of these charges. There's no crimes here. I don't know how they'd put it. But he could get, who knows, 55, 60 votes for that and put it away and move on to something else. Now, from my perspective, I think for the Republicans, one aspect would be to just draw this out and let it go to kind of a trial process and drag it out for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks and let Elizabeth Warren and some of these other senators running for president just kind of stew in the Senate. But I think McConnell's approach has some merit, frankly, and so we'll see if he's going to go that route. Now, let me say also, in terms of impeachment, the Senate has quite a bit of leeway in how they go about this, and although it's clear that the Chief Justice has to preside, but under the Constitution, any civil official can be impeached. So that means the vice president could be impeached, and obviously judges can be impeached. And in fact, in the last 3 or 4 decades, I think a dozen or more federal judges have been impeached and removed through the Senate. And in those cases, it has nothing to do with the Chief Justice, any of that sort. The Senate sets up a committee that hears the charges, and I think it's probably the Senate Judiciary Committee, but I'm not sure. So they didn't bother bringing them out on the floor. I mean, the House impeaches, and then the Senate sets up a committee to look at the charges, and then they make a recommendation to the floor of the Senate. And again, it takes 2/3 of the Senate then can convict the judge, let's say, and they're removed, they're out. And it's kind of interesting. Some of these judges have been sitting in prison, and they still insist on being impeached and convicted and removed through conviction. I don't know, and some of them, of course, just resign before it actually gets to that point, and so there's a variety of situations there. But the vice president could be impeached. I assume you could impeach the Secretary of Defense if you wanted to. He or she would be a civil officer. But obviously this is a lot more important, and the whole thing is, frankly, a total travesty. In any case.
Yeah, it's a bit much. Blowback against it, too. If you believe the polls, what they say is that this is a Monmouth poll. 50% said the president should not be impeached, and 45 support it. And then you've got another poll that says, I think it's Quinnipiac, 51% are opposed to impeachment.
Yeah. Well, I think what's happened is the Democrats have fumbled and bumbled around here to the point where, and they've come up with nothing substantial. They're basically making this up. And I think people generally recognize that this is really a farce. So let's hope that some of the senators and some of the members of the House come to their senses here.
If, I do want to get on to other things, but I also want to note, it seems that while the Democrats overfocus on President Donald Trump, and the Democrats pretty much achieved nothing.
Yes.
Trump gets in a lot of conservative judges at the federal level and cuts regulations left and right, pleasing to, I would think, small, medium, and large businesses.
Oh, absolutely. I think the prosperity the economy has seen here has been, to a great extent, to the fact that these agencies have cut way, way back in how they have tried to push around and overregulate businesses in this country. And you turn Americans loose to make money, there's a lot of people out there that are pretty good at it. So I think that it really has given the economy a boost. But we'll just have to, we'll just have to see how this plays out. I must say, the other thing that came out this past week was the Inspector General. I mean, that's just sad.
The Inspector General's report.
This guy Carter Page, the way they tried to incriminate him, and there were leaks involved, and the media was going after him, and he had nothing to do with this. As far as he's completely innocent. And there was an article in, I think, the Wall Street Journal Wednesday, where he said, my life has been ruined by this in terms of the leaks and the press. And even though the Inspector General has said, they made this up. What's interesting here, of course, is that the charges that the Clintons were making against the Trumps were exactly the same the thing that the Clintons were doing against the Trumps. And so it's a very clever way of kind of trying to foist it off onto Trump. But the point I want to make here is I've just finished reviewing this book by Johnny Snyder called The Districts. It's out on, it's just out, and it's a study of the Eastern and Southern Federal District Courts in Manhattan. And one section is on Preet Bharara and his investigation and prosecution of so-called white-collar crime and insider trading. And the FBI is doing the same thing in that section. If people take a look and read it, one guy, leaks were coming out. The one investment fellow commits suicide, and there wasn't anything to these leaks. There was an illegal search and seizure, and most of the charges eventually were thrown out. So the sorts of things that the Inspector General is dealing with here in this whole Russia collusion fiasco, the FBI was doing the same sort of thing, has been doing the same sort of thing in other areas of the country, and they ruin people's lives. I encourage people to take the whole book is very good, frankly. So
what's this called?
The Districts.
Who wrote it?
Johnny Snyder. I'm thinking I got his last name right. I think it's Snyder. But
check that out.
It's out on the bookshelves in Barnes and Noble and such. And
question about Inspector General Michael Horowitz, if I could.
Sure.
Is Michael Horowitz similar to Robert Mueller in that the reports that they issue almost try to please both sides of the aisle without irritating the establishment too much?
I don't know. I think you're overstating that. But there are some questions there. It seems to me some of these people like Brennan and some of these other people were actually just lying when they were talking about these issues to the press. They knew that Carter Page didn't have anything to do with this, and one example, the FBI agent changes the report so when they give it to the FISA court, it sounds like Page is involved, and the FBI knew he wasn't involved. This agent knew he wasn't involved. He was working with the CIA helping him. But Horowitz backs off of any kind of criminal prosecution. Now, maybe, somebody else will follow up there. But, it seems to me some of these people are guilty of some pretty nasty things.
Can I, I remembered at Alfred State College I had a public speaking coach named Brian Gillespie.
Yeah?
Great guy.
Yeah,
Brian,
I think I know Brian.
Yeah, Brian Gillespie was a wonderful teacher. Anyways, I remember him saying, and I was in a play at Alfred State, so he was giving me a little acting advice. He said, the way your character will say certain people's names will make the audience feel a certain way about that character in the play. And I think the same is true. If you flip on CNN, they say Carter Page. Right. Same thing.
That's right. No, that's yeah.
It's almost a form of innuendo.
It is a form of innuendo.
And smearing,
Almost to it, yeah. And it's pretty nasty the way. And what's sad is, as somebody was pointing out the other night, if you want the voters to make informed decisions, they have to have reasonably valid information. And it's amazing some of the things that are said on CNN and MSNBC and some of these. It's just, and some of these guys have gotten sued, of course, one way or another. I think, anyway, that's enough of that.
Can we move on to state?
Sure.
State news.
Sure.
My observation from far away from Albany is that I think the reason that you see on the Empire State Report that all these Republican state senators are leaving the state Senate, resigning early, not even finishing their terms in some cases.
Yes.
Is Kathy Young is gone.
Yeah. Well, I think she was very, very effective. And I think these guys look at Flanagan and Akshar, who are supposed to be the leaders of what's left of the Republicans, and they're just shaking their heads. I mean, these guys are disasters. And as we know, Mr. Robach in Rochester this past week has
Senator
said he's not going to run for re-election.
No.
And so right now it's 40 to 23. And the fact is that Republicans, of those 23 Republicans, I think you have another 3 or 4 open seats now that the Democrats can come in, and a couple of them, like Robach's district, is pretty heavily Democrat, and Mr. Jacobs' district in Erie County in Buffalo, I think, is 2/3 Democrat. So the Democrats come in there and put up a fight. I think they can pick up a couple more seats. Now, some of those 40 state senators on the Democrat side, I think have got to be vulnerable. But the problem the Republicans have, of course, is they no longer have any money to speak of. So they poured thousands of dollars in this race for Kathy Young's seat to make sure this fellow Borrello from Chautauqua County won. When it didn't make, Mr. Crandall or Borrello, either one of them, fine Republicans, why they would pour thousands of dollars into Chautauqua County to ensure this guy's election, I don't know. But the bottom line is they're, 17 down now in the state Senate, and they're getting, nobody's going to give them much money. And my understanding is the state senators, the Republican state senators, have been told if you're going to run, you've got to raise your own money.
Wow.
Well, some of them can do that, but a lot of them are going to have a real problem doing that. And frankly, that's why I think a lot of them are just pulling out. They're saying, why am I spending my money and time here to end up one of 22 senators in the New York State Senate? That's not an unreasonable question. So I think in terms of the state Senate, the Republicans are in serious trouble. And the fact of the matter is, again, as we pointed out, in 2020, those districts will be redrawn. Now, the Assembly, I think, is pretty well set, but the Republicans are such a small group in the state Assembly that nobody cares much one way or another there anyway. Although we do have a couple really fine Assembly people here, Joe Giglio and Phil Palmisano are really quite fine candidates. But the state Senate, they can add Senate seats. Like last time around, they just added another one. They had 62, they made it 63. Under the state constitution, the Assembly is 150, and that's it. So they'd have to have an amendment to change that. But they could reduce the state Senate. Let's say, well, the heck with it, we'll make it 62 or 60. And in terms of redrawing the lines, you can bet that the Republicans are not going to come out particularly well once those Senate lines are redrawn. So I would say right now the Democrats and Mr. Cuomo are in the driver's seat, or as the Arabs would say, in the top of the palm tree. They're sitting up there in the top of the palm tree, looking at those little Republicans running, scurrying around out there.
Did you see what Congressman Tom Reed said in that statement he put out about CNN and the RNC?
No, I did not.
Well, the RNC, Republican National Committee, put out a tweet condemning CNN for not interviewing Senator Lindsey Graham. And Congressman Tom Reed put out a funny statement saying, hey, I was on in Graham's place, and when you put me on, you get huge ratings. And
Yeah, right. And I don't think Lindsey Graham has a degree from Alfred University, does he?
No, that's right, and Congressman Tom Reed does.
Yeah.
So AU means high ratings.
Well, okay.